Welcome to Founders Unplugged, hosted by Greg McCallum. Long-form, honest conversations with founders and entrepreneurs from around the world.
I'm the founder and CEO of Sybill.ai. We are building AI sales agent for the individual account executives. My personal background, I've been doing this for 4.5 years. Prior to that, I used to lecture at Stanford. So I was teaching optimization theory and linear algebra and have been in the AI/ML domain way before it was cool. So primarily my entire journey has been building for healthcare AI applications, where I've worked around glucose monitoring and uh, retinal vision restoration of sorts. So trying to provide blind people the ability to see again. Over the last 4.5 years, when we started out, it was sort of a different concept, but over time we evolved into building this kind of an all-in Jarvis for the sales rep.
Right, and that's where you are here. So, well, thank you so much for joining me. I really, really appreciate it, and because I know how incredibly busy you are, as are all my guests really on this show. So I'm very, very lucky that you want to chat with me. So, yeah, look, I mean, I've got a lot of selfish reasons for wanting to speak to you. I mean, not only is my startup kind of tangentially in the space that you're in, as you know, which is hugely interesting. But my background is in sales, and obviously, the way that AI is going to play a part in that specific industry is hugely interesting to me. So I've got a lot of questions for you about that. But I suppose before we get into Sybil itself, and specifically how that works and where the idea come from and stuff, I'd be interested to know a bit more about what you were doing before that, which you just touched on. So, and so the journey that led you to being a founder. I mean, prior to being a founder of Sybil, had you ever sort of had any entrepreneurial endeavors, or was this was there anything like this ever crossed your mind before, or was this the idea that just completely consumed you and you just had to do it?
Yeah, I've been thinking about startup ideas for about 5 years before Sybil, though this is the first one I was able to get into actually and do it and make it sort of a reality. There were many moments in the past, one right around the pandemic time, where we felt we have got it, and then things didn't work out. We were doing this thing called providing in like smart carts for retail stores, like an Amazon Go on wheels. So basically, every shopping cart, like in Walmart or Target, would be fitted with a smart tablet, which would help the individual to go around the store and see ads in the aisle. And then because it's fitted with smart cameras, they would be able to auto check out without having to go through the cashier lines. It was a really, really cool concept. But because of the pandemic, we had to shut it down. Could not get that over. Uh, but Sybil itself was born less from like envisioning problems, more from something I felt. So as I was sharing, I was lecturing during that time. So before the pandemic, it was all an in-person classroom setting. And right after the pandemic, I had to move things into a Zoom session. So what ended up happening was like having 50 students in the class and not able to see any of the faces. I was like completely fumbling to get any reaction from their side. Like, what are they thinking? Like, my jokes are landing or not? It was a total mess. I used to call in my TA who would look at those wall of faces and he would be like telling me signals real time. And he got pissed off after a couple of sessions. He's like, I'm a PhD student, don't make me do this. So that's how we thought, like, maybe we build an AI agent to read body language and non-verbal cues on a Zoom call. We used to very fancily call it like the mind reader for Zoom. And that's how we sort of came up even with the name Sybil, after a Harry Potter character.
Right. I didn't realize there was a connection there. That's cool.
So yeah, that's how I got into it. And I was like, I am a lecturer. That's probably not the only domain which is facing this challenge of like reading people's minds on Zoom calls. So why don't we do something about it? So that was like the initial inspiration with Sybil. And then it was so cool at that point, like we decided we will quit our jobs. We'll or take a leave of absence and then just go headfirst into it.
So the entrepreneurial bug had been with you for a while then, I suppose.
Yeah.
Before that point. So was it the case that were you lecturing before the first concept and then sort of left that and then come back to it? So you sort of going to and fro?
No, I was doing parallelly. The first
Okay.
concept was more parallel. This one was where I left it completely and then jumped fully into it. But
Okay. And what were you lecturing in again? Sorry, I forgot.
it was more optimization theory and linear algebra. So kind
Right.
of what forms the basics of the AI and ML research that we see today.
Right.
So very mathematical way of looking at computer science.
Okay. So I mean that's a very interesting place to start. So how did it go from that concept in, like you say, trying to read people's minds on Zoom calls to becoming what it is now and being sales tech essentially?
Yeah. So we spent, and so, well, we wanted to pick a single domain, like, because the whole mind reader for Zoom thing is very broad. And they're like, we can't do everything at one point. So we wanted to get into one domain. And the domain needed to have certain characteristics, so to say, right? The data needs to be there. It is a very high quality label data that we needed. There needs to be a clear outcome of what we are providing and what people are able to measure against. And it also needs to be frequently occurring enough that we can collect repeated instances of the same thing, but with minor variations. So sales came out to be the only domain which satisfies these three criteria of consistency, reliability, and repeatability that had, like, and we surveyed like 15 or 20 different domains, like everything from politics to video games and advertisement and whatnot. Like, so we jumped into sales because of a very problem focused, like a solution focused mindset. Like, we are going to do this because this can be done. But then once we jumped into it, we started talking to salespeople. We probably had about 350 to 400 conversations just with salespeople in the first year. And everyone would come on the call and they would be like, wow, this is so cool. And I want this. And it's like the shit. And like salespeople are very effusive when they want to be positive. And we were like, great, we are on the right path. Let's keep running forward. And then we started building the product and we started showing it to salespeople. And that's where we realized, like, while people are saying it's cool, in their hands, they're not really using it at all. They are like, either they are not a big enough problem for them, or it's like they are not interested about it, or it's too much work, or they're tied with other stuff. So all in all, we spent almost a year trying to push this down salespeople's throat and trying to see if this would work. And they're like, no, we won't accept it. But meanwhile, as we were doing these interviews, what we realized is there is another thing which was consistently coming up again and again, which was like the amount of admin or manual work which they used to do or have to do, even with all the tools and technologies at their hand. It was a crazy setup. Like, in some companies, they were using 25 tools, many times, multiple tools for the same exact task.
Yeah.
And reps were confused. Like, if you think about a junior rep or even someone who has been in the industry for a few years, for them, it was like they only learn 20 to 30% of the tech stack, and for the rest, they're just asking for help. For a senior rep, they know the tech stack, but they can't really use it. And the end result we were hearing was like a sales rep is spending 20 to 25% of the time on calls with customers, and everything else is going into managing these tools, finding information, creating some kind of collaterals. And that really stuck as the problem. Now, this is pre-GPT era, so we didn't really have a solution to how we would solve the problem. We knew that there is something that is to be done here. So we started building our own in-house ML models, and they failed miserably. Like, they were doing some things, but man, no comparison. This is like early 2022. when we were like, okay, we are gonna surface out next steps and pain points that the customers are talking about and help them write some kind of follow-up email. Now, like the accuracy was bad, but come November, we were actually running out of our pre-seed money. But this ChatGPT thing gets launched, and we were like, this is chef's kiss. This is like the thing that you need.
Great
Like,
timing. Yeah.
you wouldn't believe me, it was the best thing that could have ever happened. Like, so we got we got a sneak peek into it like 26th of November, I think. They're like, we need to implement this tech into our system. Like 28th we started. We had our first prototype in 11 days, and we showed it to customers, and they went bonkers over it. And this was a call summarization tool. Like, we would give an outcome, one paragraph outcome, and next steps, and nothing else. And people just went crazy. And we were like, okay, we are going to develop this over the winters, because anyways, we are running out of money, nothing to lose here. So 20th of from 20th December to 5th January, we were just building the tech. Most of the product team was actively working. And 5th January, we launched. This is 23. In the remaining 25 days of January, we got 100% more revenue than what we had gotten in the last 6 months combined since the launch of the product. It was a revelation. Like, seeing product market fit for the first time is so crazy.
That's amazing. So prior to that, then you mentioned that you were running out of pre-seed. So you managed to secure pre-seed funding then before that point. But I suppose then, so that was for a very different product concept initially. Then that was still this idea of being able to pick up on people's behaviors, essentially their emotional states and so on within video meetings, I assume, for salespeople, right? Okay,
yeah,
so
exactly.
this also signaled a very hard pivot from the original, I suppose, investment proposal to the current investors. How much did you raise at pre-seed?
So we raised 1.5 in pre-seed, and we were raising a seed at the same time of this pivot.
Right.
But the seed, that process was a brutal process because we did not have a clear signs of PMF. So we actually were raising the seed on the same idea as the previous one, or rather a combination of the previous idea and the new idea, but without really the foundations of new idea happening.
Right.
And that was probably the roughest part in my startup journey. Also the part where I learned this is what I will be doing for the rest of my life. Not even if it is not Sybil, it's going to be another startup. It's going to be the same kind of grind and the same kind of life. Like, that time was a very, very interesting time for the company as a whole.
What? So you mean you knew that this was going to be what you wanted to do for the rest of your life because of how crazy it was, but how much you enjoyed it? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. So we were raising from if I look at timelines, we were raising from June 22 to I got the term sheet on 25th December of that year. It took us 7 months to raise another $1.5 million in seed round. And I probably have spoken to every single investor in the Valley to raise my seed round. Hundreds of firms, if not more. The thing that I realized, and we had, before we got the term sheet, we actually had 2 acquisition offers and 1 more incoming.
All right.
But because we were running out of money, we had to figure out something to do for the rest of the team. But it was very clear, in that sort of dark or pretty dark days, it was very clear that the only thing that matters to me is I want to be able to solve these unique kind of challenging problems every single day. So it became very clear this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life.
You knew you had caught the bug, basically.
Yeah,
you were.
That was the point. Before that, I was let's try this out and see what happens.
Right.
And I tried out many, many things, but that when we were getting acquired, I was okay, I'm gonna join this team, but it's only going to be for a very, very short period of time before I go out again and start again. And as luck would have it, we did get a very chance term sheet. I had taken a 2-day break in December. I was in Las Vegas. I came back to my hotel room at 4 a.m. in the night, and I saw an email pop up with a term sheet, and it was the best feeling ever. Like,
So you were very
uh,
close to it to basically selling
we were two
in
months
terms.
out,
Wow.
to running out of cash. And
Yeah.
this was like, we were not telling investors that we were working on generative AI at that time. That was still the emotional intelligence pitch. So they did get, like, we did get money on that. But then in our first board meeting, right after the seed, we are like, okay, we are pivoting. We are doing a totally new thing. Here is the traction on it. This works. You
Mm.
should try using it. And they're like, okay, fine.
And
Do what
everyone
you
was
want.
okay with that. Yeah.
They were, yeah, very
Good.
supportive investors.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's great.
Hi, a friendly reminder to share this episode with your network, like, and subscribe. And if you are feeling really supportive, please consider reviewing the show on the podcast platform of your choice. It all really helps support what we do. Thank you. Now back to the show.
So then things, I assume, just sort of progressed from there. I mean,
Uh,
well, so tell me a bit more about how the product continued to develop, because that's obviously the very sort of embryonic bit of it, and it now does a lot more. So how did you then continue to get those insights and sort of add them into the roadmap, as it were?
Yeah, the traction continued very aggressively. We closed quite a few, both big and small customers. We went from like point 0.1 to a million in like 12 months period,
Wow.
very quick. And this was like with very little marketing. So, and very basic product, in fact. Like
Mm.
most of the core product that was getting sold was this whole concept of call summarization, which nowadays is ubiquitous. Every single tool which is around video and meetings has call summarization embedded into it.
Mm.
So, but we were probably one of the first to build this, and we're really growing very quickly, and we continue to grow because the accuracy of the tool was very high. Most of the tools were using LLM wrappers back then, which were pretty bad, like in those days. So we had built kind of an early version of RAG implementation for a call transcripts. Now, middle of the year, we realized this is not going to scale because uh, everyone is going to build this very soon. So we were like, we need to do something else. But what is that? So what we figured out was like call level insights are good, but they don't help completion of an workflow, especially in an enterprise deal scenario. Like I could be qualifying, for example, for Medic across multiple calls. And if I'm just doing a single call level outcome, I would look at every call and I'm saying, I have not qualified the deal enough, I'm not qualified the deal enough. But as a whole, I have. So the output needs to be correct. So we started focusing on deal summarization and deal insights. So we started like, how do we understand the deal as a whole, which is a series of conversations, internal, external, emails, calls, phone calls, Slack messages, as opposed to individual of these calls. And it's a sequential series, like something that happened before can be overridden by something that happens after. So if the VP sales said that they don't have the budget for the tool 3 months ago, and now last week they said they have the budget for the tool, the information needs to be updated. That whole process was where we started like putting all of our engineering and product effort, like trying to figure out, okay, how do we get this in a way where it starts it's actually accurate, because hallucination in these is even today it's very high. But then how do we then use the data that gets generated to build workflows on top? So we solved both of these problems. The first one towards middle of last year, 24, and then the second one very recently, actually. So now what we're able to do is we can understand where a deal is exactly at in its sales cycle, and we can build workflows on top of that deal. So today, the way I look at Sybil is it's like a human sitting on the side of the rep doing everything that the rep would do otherwise, besides taking conversations with the rep. So if I were to like think of what a rep would look at with an EA, creating collaterals, any kind of custom decks, any kind of sort of PDFs, one pagers, scheduling meetings with the other person, researching information online, all of this requires the AI, the system, to have a deep understanding of what the tech is or what stage the deal is at, and then taking the next step on top.
Yeah, so like the ultimate assistant for a sales rep assistant, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. And I know that you've just not too long recently closed your Series A
Yep.
as well. Was it around 11 mil or something like that? Wasn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah. So amazing. Congratulations. That's huge
Thank you.
news. And I assume a lot of that is off the back of what you were just talking about there. These new, this new development, right? This new version, I suppose, of Sybil. What is it, 2.0 or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when are you planning on going to market with this? I mean, I'm assuming it's at some point this year. Do you have a sort of a place in this, a place in the timeline where you want to start bringing this out to the world?
Yeah. So we will bring this out in Feb 15th.
Oh, really? That's amazing.
Yeah. So
okay.
We are very close to start building, like completing the automations and the workflows on top of what we have. But it's going to be super exciting. It's like the idea is, what we hope is, if you think of a rep, the fact that they're taking 2 hour worth of calls as opposed to 6 hours or 7 hours out of an 8 hour day, that number will completely flip on its head. I want the rep to be able to like go into every meeting fully prepared with what has been discussed before. Who are these people on the call? What is this company's top priorities? And then once they are off the meeting, instantly the customer gets the follow-up with custom material, with text, with PDFs. And if they send a reply back, the response or the next step should be instantaneous. And those could be internal responses or those could be external responses. So my customer could ask me, hey, can you give me a discount? They could ask me, can you delete this clause from the contract? Or what is this feature on the roadmap? Or when is this coming out? Sibyl should be able to take that response in. It should be able to reach out to your legal team, to your manager, to your product team, and ask them for those responses to those specific individual questions, and then create a follow-up back to the customer without the rep interacting with it. It is where I see the field progressing as a whole, because you cannot take the human out of the loop in a sales conversation, but you can make sure that everything around that sales conversation happens so seamlessly that it's not even it's like the next level thing.
Yeah, because like you said, there's an enormous amount of time put into activity that isn't directly selling or having conversations with prospects. And like you said, that's the majority of the time a rep spends on their activity. So there's opportunity there to alleviate some of that stress. Yeah, that's really exciting. So I'm assuming you're going to be using it internally for your own sales process then, right? Yeah, you've got to eat your own dog food, as they say, right? So that's going to be...
We have to.
Yeah, so that's going to be interesting. I mean, I'm assuming you've probably been using your product up till now anyway, so it's just the case of now using the newer versions. Have you started tinkering with it in an internal way, sort of getting ready to start selling, I guess?
Yeah, so we now have a Slack channel where any rep could ask any question about something that was already in the repository, and it's like called Ask Sibyl, and Sibyl would generate an answer about that. We have been doing that for a few months now. Like reps have so many questions about everything in the company, like product features, SOC 2 compliance, other requests. Like they used to wait for a human to answer. Now it's like the answer is available at their fingertips. We are using it for coaching. That's another big area. So we are able to push a very specific, concise, rate the reps on these specific qualities, and it's able to generate an output. And it's not an easy thing to do, because like if you look at any AI agent or any AI system, like especially if it's a multi-step thing, like let's say I want to update information, I want to create a custom deck for this meeting or deal or conversation, right? First, I need to understand which specific deck needs to be templated. Then I need to understand what information needs to be added. Then I need to add that relevant information. It has to be customized to the specific parts of the deck. It's a multi-step process, and accuracy in each step becomes very, very critical. Like if I have a 95% accuracy in one step, with a 5-step agent, it's like 70% or 60%. accurate. That's really bad. I can't use that in enterprise scenarios. Only if the accuracy is closer to 99% can it become to a point where it's actually usable in an enterprise scenario. And that's like what's the hard part about this. It's a very crowded market, but uh, if you get that accuracy right at each and every step, the compounding error reduces significantly over time.
And I suppose there's a very bitter pill to swallow here as well, which is that if you manage to get that accuracy up to that level and being consistently up to that level, then it's usually going to outperform a human being more consistently as well, because the reality is a human sales rep makes a ton of mistakes, even at enterprise level, right? Like you were saying, if they're looking at for example, putting together a specific pitch deck or something after a conversation, like the amount of time sales reps forget, please make sure you include this or include that, especially when you're speaking with multiple prospects and multiple conversations, like reps forget stuff. So if you can, and deals get lost. So if you can close the gap on that, well, that's more revenue, right? Just in of itself, that's one value proposition just on its own that is good enough to just be like, prevent your reps from forgetting stuff, or don't rely on your reps having to remember everything out of all of the deals that they're working on, right? Because to your point as well, and to your point as well about the tech stacks, that's an enormous, it's just a minefield. Like, I know when I've and I still do sales now, but when I was working as sales rep, like, the amount of things that you've got to remember to do just from that perspective, let alone what the customer wants and what they expect and all that. Just remember, I've got to make sure I mark that, put my notes here, do this, do that, all of that stuff. Even if you were just to minimize that and say, do you know what, sales rep, you've got an assistant, and that assistant is going to take care of that for you. Their ability to close will go up just from doing that. So you put these things together. You're talking about a great combination that should, in theory, increase conversion rates considerably.
You're absolutely right. Like most human reps and humans in general have to choose between fast or good.
Yeah.
And AI can bring both of them together. Like you can have it fast and you can have it good. And that both increases like the velocity of the deals, but also the win rate.
Yeah.
And what we hypothesize is if we're able to build this agent to its fullest extent, we should be able to bring in potentially 3 to 4 times more sales per individual as opposed to today. And I really mean 3 to 4 times. So if someone is able to sell $1 million worth of goods or services, assuming there is lead flow coming in, they should be able to sell deals worth $3 to $4 million instead. And that's where the true power of these agents, especially these co-pilot agents, will come. You get a 10x salesperson in a sense with using a tool like this.
Even what you were saying there about that Slack bot that you've got, just being able to, as a rep, being able to get answers on things that ordinarily you might be waiting a long time for. I'm assuming that bot also learns. So if you need to get an answer from legal or whatever, it can do that. It can answer those questions for you. Great. But then once it knows the answer, then presumably it will just know, it will be able to give you that information automatically. So, it's a lot of, as you know, the deal cycles can tend to go on a long time because there are a ton of questions that the rep needs to get back to the prospect for. And in that scenario, you could probably ask while you're on the call with them and just be like, right, all the questions have been answered. We have nothing left to discuss. Let's talk about what the next stage of closing this deal would be, as opposed to waiting a week, 2 weeks, getting all of the decision makers together again and all that. So just little things like that. That's the difference between an experienced sales rep and an unexperienced sales rep too, is when you have an experienced sales rep, they already know those answers, which is why the momentum of them being good at their role, closing more deals, getting a better results, that's part of it too. It's experience, right? But if you can accelerate that experience, even better too, right? What about 100%. You mentioned about the coaching side of things too. Now that's obviously very interesting for me because that's where we sit in the sort of performance review and coaching side of things, because I'm very much a firm believer that unfortunately there's been a bit too much of a reliance on AI, I think, even in the last few years, to provide feedback. And I think it's made sales leaders lazy, to be honest. I think that sales leaders aren't doing anywhere near as much sort of performance reviews and sitting in on calls and providing feedback and doing regular coaching and stuff. So we're actually going the other way. We're encouraging human to human reviews, even on a remote level, which is where most reps are now these days. So how do you see your product sort of facilitating that? Are there plans to just use AI to do that, or to try and encourage humans to be a little bit more proactive in that?
Yeah. So there are two parts to coaching, and actually two different dimensions. So one is the deal level coaching, which is individual deal. I need to understand strategically, okay, how do I find the next step? The second is the people coaching, like improving the selling skills of a sales rep.
Yeah.
And then each of these, there is a dimension of something which is very, very basic, which is generalizable, almost custom, like to an overall population or overall set of deals. And second is more custom to either an individual or a specific deal. What we believe in, the leadership and the managers typically don't have enough time to provide live coaching on a deal level. Like, and they don't have enough information as well. They can do this level of fine-grained coaching to a person on their skills, like how do I do discovery, how do I do objection handling, how do I do the close of the sales. But and but to a certain extent, they are short of that time because they have 10 reps, each of them taking 40 calls, like four, like 10 deals in parallel. You have 100 deals. You possibly cannot go through 100 gong calls and figure out, like, in a week, what can I coach on? The other part of this is, as I was sharing, like the generalizable, the low level coaching stuff, and then the more in-depth, nuanced coaching stuff. Humans are really good at figuring out the nuanced coaching stuff because that takes time and it has value. But when it comes to reps, many of them are making very, very basic mistakes, like not knowing, this is a very cliched example, but not knowing the economic buyer until the negotiation stages or until the POC has been done. AI can flag this out very specifically and very continuously and very reliably today, so that the manager or the leader, the human in the loop, can actually bring in more nuanced feedback and say, okay, here is the economic buyer, but is this a good economic buyer or not the ideal economic buyer for us? And in each case, what specifically do we do? Now, there is a vision for, like, from our side where eventually we should be able to take away that role as well. But to start off with, at least these basic things needs to be flagged out to a rep, and they need to be able to act on it live in a deal process.
Yeah, I think we share the same hypothesis and the same vision as well, which is, yeah, there's the current technology is very good at that sort of basic level stuff, right? Conversational intelligence, just pointing out with some pretty standard parameters, or maybe giving it a specific sales framework, etc. Like, you could have done this a bit better, you could have done this a bit better. But it's that nuanced stuff. That's the stuff that interests me, because that's the stuff that you can only get from sitting next to an experienced salesperson, someone that's done it a long time, someone that's seen it, been there, done that, picking up on very, very subtle behaviors or wordings of the prospect, etc. That's the kind of stuff, and that's what I'm interested in teaching AI how to do. I mean, that's what our mission. That's literally what our mission is. Our mission is to teach humans, to capture human skill in such a way that we can transfer it to AI, which, as of right now, it doesn't do it anywhere close to it. I mean, I heard someone say the other day, the thing about artificial intelligence is it's neither artificial nor is it intelligent. It's not got either one of those things, but I would like it to be at least intelligent, and when it comes to human skill, I think there's a huge opportunity there, but the way we need to do that is quite complex, I've discovered in building my company. But there is a way to do it that no one's really doing, and I won't go on too much because otherwise I might reveal my hand. But I think it's very interesting. It's a very interesting thing to delve into.
Today, what AI can do is simply repeatable scenarios, like things that they have seen in the past. Like, either you need to give them enough of repeatable scenarios, but every deal has its own nuances, and those cannot be picked up by AI very easily.
Well, yeah, and
unless it has a VAR.
Yeah, and the problem that we discovered, very early on in looking at this, and the sort of light bulb moment for me personally, was kind of realizing that you can show AI as many scenarios as you want. It's not going to learn what it is you want to see as a result of that. You need to be very, very specific and binary in what it is you want to pay attention to, why, what is good practice versus bad, and why. And that takes a very different approach. And I think that's the thing about a lot of these conversational intelligence platforms and a lot of other sales tech platforms is, from the ground up, they've not been built to do that. And that's okay because they don't really need to. It's about delivering something else. I think there's a place for what we're doing to help companies like yours and other sales, by gathering this information and saying, there you go, there it is, we've done it for you, because of why would you want to go and build all of that? Like, that's just crazy. Like that, it would massively distract, I think, from the main mission. But it speaks to a very, something I think people don't realize about AI a lot of the time is it's not going to, you can't just give it something and say, there you go, learn everything about this. It's like, well, what do you want me to learn? Like, it's like saying, come and watch me do my job. And I want you to learn. Okay, well, which skill though? Like, and why? And you don't speak to them. You just say, watch. Like, that's not teaching. You need to say, when I do this, this is good, this is bad, etc. So it's quite complex.
It's what we discovered in this process is that's why you need intermediate checkpoints of data representation in order to figure out what's happening at a high level. Like, I had this really interesting example where it's like, if I wanna figure out for a highway, what is the number of cars going, what's the average speed of the car using a camera data. I can build a computer vision model which takes in a continuous set of video recording and then label each of the video recording, and I need hundreds or maybe millions of video recordings in order to get that answer. Or I can break down the problem into specific segments, and each of the segments can get me to a deeper answer. So here is a video recording. First, identify the number of cars, identify point A, point B. And each of those steps are now much more easily figure outable as opposed to the entire problem as a black box problem. A lot of people, when they think about AI, they confound both of them. The ability to do the first with the latter. So that creates a lot of problems. So for us, when we were looking at it, like looking at conversations alone, like independently is not the answer. So we need to look at it as a part of a deal. As part of a deal, a conversation goes through basically, it's a series of group of calls or conversations. That is what forms a deal, where a deal goes through multiple steps, which is the group of calls, and in each step there is a series of calls that happens. So to be able to understand what stage in that entire sequence you are at, and what is the stage of the buyer, the seller at that point, and then using that data to generate hypothesis on top is like where we think of it as a deal level mechanism to provide recommendations on what the rep should be doing. If I just follow all the conversations, it's going to be a huge freaking mess. Or my rep or my AI should have seen the world data on sales, which is not possible otherwise.
Yeah, you raise a really interesting point too, which is something that I'm not sure if I've thought of too much until just now, and I'm only just starting to think about it. Which is this? You mentioned about the stage that the buyer is in too. Like, that's a really interesting point, because if when we, as salespeople, if we're selling, we're very much concerned with what stage we're in, where the deal's in. We're making those assumptions with data, without data, etc. But that's a really important point, and I wonder if there's even some use in actually just asking, whether it's automated or even directly as a salesperson, like, okay, look, I am going to mark you on my CRM as here, but I'm curious to know, where would you mark us on the CRM? Like, you know what I mean? Like, that would be a really interesting activity to like try on the deal cycle. Like, do you think we're getting closer or not? Like, which I suppose a good salesperson does do to an extent. You ask for the close, you ask for next steps and so on. But actually just being like, my manager tells me to move you along the pipeline. Where would you put you on the pipeline? Like, that would be quite cool to find out how they'd react,
Yeah. I had one A told me of some time back, they were a part of President's Club in their company, and they're like, I am so good because I used to be on the procurement side of exactly these companies that
Right.
our product is trying to sell into. Like he's like, I've
Just knows
seen
how they
how
think.
their minds work. I've
Yeah.
seen what the processes are. That's what makes me so good in this role. And I think that's so true.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not easy to gain because to go from procurement to sales, that's two separate industries
Yeah.
technically.
Yeah.
But having that experience is like, oh my God. Uh, that's the other part. Like, I do hope eventually we get things to a point where you can encode some understanding of that procurement side of the house into the system. I don't know when it will happen, but it is something that we have it. Uh, we would like to ideally do, and it should happen ideally.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that because a lot of individuals and founders that I know in this space are thinking a lot about that. You know,
Mm.
about potential future products or even future companies
Yeah.
that are in the procurement side because of it kind of makes sense if you think that there's a kind of an arms race when you think about it.
Mm.
You know, from AI, sort of the AI sales world and the procurement side, that things are going to have to even out. You know, it's going to
Mm.
feel, otherwise it's going to feel maybe a little bit unfair to those in procurement, that there's a whole stack of tools and armaments on the side of those doing the selling and not as much on the side of the purchasing. So something's going to have to balance that out. And it would make sense that at some point those two things would communicate, right? Those two tech stacks would actually work together, and there might be some integration there to create even more seamless buying and selling engagements, right?
Mm.
If you are enjoying this episode and want to support the show, please like, subscribe with notifications turned on, and let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. This lets YouTube know we are doing something right. Back to the show.
That would be interesting. I am personally, I'm like, the market for procurement is still a much smaller one than what is for sales.
Mm.
So y- you are going to have some companies that are building for the procurement side, but if the procurement is primarily human led, because there is someone's job on the line in case a mispurchase of $1 million happens. So someone is going to get like very pissed off.
Mm.
Or so you need to have a human in the loop there. And to build trust on a human, they need to have another human in the loop. This is like my thesis about why it's way more exciting to be in the AE space than in the STR space. Like, because an STR can be replaced by AI to a decent amount of extent, and AE cannot be replaced by AI.
Well, you
So you
think
need,
never?
I don't believe so.
Really interesting.
Unless procurement becomes AI originated, in which case the company running becomes AI originated,
Well,
which
you
is a
see,
very different paradigm.
yeah, you see,
That
I've
can
got a
happen.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I've got a sort of, I guess, a hypothesis on this as someone who likes to think about what the future would look like. I think we all do, but where I think the biggest amount of potential for procurement lies is within government, right?
Mm.
Especially if we look at the military and
Yeah.
just national services and things like that. And that's where I think, if we think about who's got the most money and who's got the most to lose or win as a result of creating automations, like the AI SDR equivalent is in AI procurement, and I think it will probably be there. And so I think we will see that, and that, like, to your point, will, I think, undoubtedly then accelerate this idea of AI BDRs, BDMs, account managers, etc., account executives, etc. So I think we will see it, and I think it will probably be as a result of government, because of then from there it will trickle down, I think, into the public sector,
But the
from the
decision
public into
making,
private.
even the decision making with federal
I
and
think
the government contracts is
so.
still going to be with him.
Maybe not decision. I don't know. I
Yeah.
think the
That's
decision making on certain things, yes, but not everything. But I think, if
possible.
we, yeah, because I think but it's just like everything, right? I mean, human beings are willing to give more and more trust over its technology over time. So it just depends. I mean, it's going to depend on how accurate things are over a certain period of time, and then more and more trust will be given. But it really depends. I mean, look, you're not going to buy nuclear weapons from whoever.
Yeah.
I don't know, but maybe purchasing, however many tons of ammunition from one country to another. Like if that's happening 20 times every hour, like across, like, okay, it's okay if it gets it wrong once, in 100 times, because actually a human being gets it once wrong every 5 times, for example. So there may be a lot of things, because again, just automation is just about mitigating risk and all that, right? So
I actually believe it's probably going to come from the other side. And
okay,
sorry, like it's going to come more from the SMB side of the house, where if I have to buy an under 10K tool, then I would not need, then I don't want to talk to a human to buy
right,
under a 10K tool. I would rather have like a best interface. And this is an idea we've been thinking about, like same next company kind of thing. Like I would rather have a chat interface where every information about my product is on that chat interface, and a buyer trying to buy my product, which is a small ticket item, they don't want to talk to a human, and I don't want to put humans to talk to them because it's a small ticket item. I want them to interact with the chat interface. It's like customer success.
yeah,
And make it so simple, like any questions that they have are answered via that chat interface. And I want to put it front and center on my website. Hey, you have questions, ask here, they will be answered. Same as what my reps are doing internally with our Ask Sybil functionality. I want to put that chat interface. And so the smaller ticket items, like you don't want the buyers to talk to someone. Buyers don't want to talk to someone. Selling companies don't want to put humans on those small ticket items. So getting that automated and much quicker. And then over time, the ticket sizes just grow. So it's coming more from sort of 5K, 1K, 10K deals and growing over a period of time
yeah,
to come hopefully closer to 25, 50K.
and I guess we're already seeing that.
In some ways,
So
yes.
yeah, I mean, especially in e-commerce, for example, we're seeing that. So I guess that's its logical starting point where you're looking at very quick interactions. I mean, even like Alexa's been able to, I could, for a while now, you've been able to say, hey, put these things on my shopping list, and then eventually just go, okay, now buy them. So I suppose, e-commerce is pushing in. So we'll probably see it sort of, I would imagine from both ends, from the bottom up and then the top down. But then, the question is then, what does that do? What does that do from an augmented salesperson perspective?
Yeah.
That would be interesting to see, because of then, well, where does that go? Because if eventually, I don't know. I think it's interesting. I mean, we could hypothesize about it till the cows come home, but I do think that that you're always going to have humans in the loop, at least for a very, very, very long time.
Yes.
But I do expect at some point that, really the account manager, you could get an AI account manager, or account executive. I think it could be possible.
It could be possible.
But I think it's a very long time away. So don't worry, any account execs listening, your job is safe for your lifetime, I think. but
it creates another kind of problem. Like if you think about automations, the SDR jobs can be automated, right? At least to a decent extent, but the A's job cannot be automated. As if that is the assumption or hypothesis we are running under. A's are all trained via SDRs. Like SDR path is the best or the most frequent part to train A's.
Yeah.
How do you find new A's to get trained if you don't have an SDR automation? That's a very big area, and it's happening actually in software as well. Like companies are starting to stop hiring any kind of junior software engineers because the code that a junior software engineer produced, that artifact can be produced by the company using AI nowadays, and much quicker and much more reliably without a human in the loop. So your senior architects don't need that junior person to generate a simple piece of code. So now you're getting into this whole talent gap from like, hey, I have graduated out of college to I need to be an expert at a domain. How do I become an expert?
Right.
It's a very, very tricky workhorse problem that's happening.
It is, and it's interesting because in some ways that could mean all the more reason why, in fact, AI, sort of more senior AI expertise would be needed, because actually it's going to be harder and harder to maybe find human versions of that, or more expensive. But I another idea of mine is that, in fact, most companies would have these AI experts less so that they are customer facing, but more so they can be internally useful. So, so actually you might have an AI account executive or senior developer or whatever it might be that can be interacted with literally like on a video call or a phone call, that is there really to serve as kind of a touch point for these literally for this kind of reason, to almost facilitate coaching, maybe to do QA, things like that. So there's I mean, I haven't entirely formulated that thought experiment, but I think you can see where I'm going with that. Like there's something to that too. So it's interesting, but you raise a very good point, and it's something that we've even thought about internally because of within our own company, and maybe you've done this too. I don't know. I'd be interested to know actually what your thoughts are on this. But with our own our 5-year forecast, for example, we're looking at personnel, and we've plotted out that we know that SDRs are probably going to be one of those things that starts to become automated, and so we look at that sort of petering off essentially of hiring, even despite the growth of the company. Suddenly, the growth of that particular area and the expense around it changes. And then we're looking at everything else and we're going, oh, like to your point, how does that affect everything else? What are we going to do to mitigate that lack of intermediate sort of experience, that entry level experience? And it's one that we haven't really been able to answer, at this point. It's difficult.
We have the same thing within the software domain. So we are stopping to hire entry-level software engineers completely and focused more on senior and staff level engineers, because if those people are talented enough that they can use AI and they're willing to do that, which they should be, then it doesn't make sense. It's like you don't need entry-level engineers to do that job. So it's already happening to some extent, even at our like small scale. And I'm sure bigger companies are going through similar exercises as well.
I suppose what it could mean is just that, I mean, from the developer perspective, for example, it does mean that maybe you'll just see a lot more company switching, because a lot more change in people's careers paths, even more so than we do now, because if it means that really, if you're junior, you're fresh out of college, you're going to have to go and work for the early stage startup. The big established corporations and startups aren't going to hire you because they're only hiring. But due to budgetary reasons, early stage startups can't afford the more senior devs anyway. So they're going to go with the junior ones, and then you can learn, you can get your experience there, maybe move between a few different ones until you can consider yourself more senior, and then go. Possibly. And maybe the same is true for sales reps, right?
Yeah,
to an extent. So
I think we did this thought experiment once, and one of the things we reached out to internally was what probably is going to happen, and this is my hypothesis for even the sales workforce as well. The gulf between a junior or an entry-level position and a senior role is going to increase in terms of the salary and the amount of money they're able to make. Like today, if you think about a junior level engineer, the salary is about 150K in Bay Area, and a senior person gets about 250 to 300K base in the Bay Area. That gulf is like gonna increase. So I'm not gonna pay as much to a junior engineer. I might pay 100K, and for a senior engineer, I might be able to pay 500K because that person can generate 10x the amount of work with the same amount of resources. And I think sales is gonna go through that same sort of gulf increasing, because if a really good rep is able to make 300, 400K a year, if they are able to use AI to the maximal extent, they should be able to make 600K, 700K in a year. And it's going to be much harder for the junior rep to showcase the ROI. And so they get less. So that's like one of the most terrifying things, because this whole gulf increase is like, it is meritocracy, because as you expand in the industry, as you expand in your skill set and your capability, your outcome or what you get increases exponentially as opposed to linearly. But then it's also going to create more division in the have and have nots kind of thing. And that's
yeah, absolutely. And presumably it's going to also make it a less attractive career path as a result, because if you're, one of the attractive reasons why people want to go into that world is because, okay, well, once I graduate, I can walk into a 100, 150K plus salary straight out of the gate. But if that goes and it's like 50, 60K, something like that, maybe less, then, and it's not even a guarantee that you'll find it because of all the, well, then it's maybe not even going to be a career path people consider to be as good. And so therefore people don't go for it, It's interesting because of, the thing is, though, I suppose it's worth pointing out is for every potential pitfall like that, there are other new opportunities that come up as to counterbalance it. So then perhaps people are going to go into specializing more in something that's more in line with the newer vision of the world, which is, I don't know, like, maintaining the AI agents, or, maybe acting more as a human in the loop and being specialized in how to keep those models continuously trained. And so actually there'll be newer jobs that are sort of presented as a result that will maybe become the newer trend. I don't know. It's going to be an interesting few years, that's for sure, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
Lots of opportunities for people that want to experiment, and it's like probably the best time for people that want to open up new companies before it becomes harder.
Yeah. And that's an interesting point too. So, it could be that, really part of the solution here is just to become a free agent. And actually that you don't just work at one company. I mean, you're already seeing that more and more now, where I mean, it seems to be like the tendency is to go, oh, in that case, I'll start an agency. Well, I'm like, well, actually, no, you don't need to start an agency. Why give yourself the headache of starting a business? Just be a free agent. Just work for 5 companies and get 5 smaller salaries, and just do that. Like, you've got AI on your side, man. You have the output of like 5 times yourself anyway. You can learn how to use that, and you could be a junior dev, and you can work for multiple companies. I think that's probably the route it should go down, and I would hope that contracts would allow for that more and more and more, salespeople included.
That's a really, really good point. Really, really good point.
Yeah. I mean, I would really like to see that, especially with salespeople. I've been saying that for a long time. I think salespeople would be much better served sometimes actually working in a couple of different organizations, because of, the burnout and the tenure in sales is awful. As you know, the staff turnover in those roles is terrible. Whereas if you aren't employed by them, if instead you are just contracted and it's, for a few hours, a few days a week or something like that, and you're doing that for a couple of different products and businesses that you're passionate about, good way to not get too burnt out, I think. Come in, hit
and you can
quota.
Use your network effect like much, much more effectively, because you sell into one, you build trust, you continue that with the next person, with the next company. It's just, it's a much more effective means.
Yeah. And, more autonomy, more being in charge of your own destiny a little bit. And it's probably great for businesses too, because if it means they don't need to be paying for pensions and national insurance and all the other stuff. So I imagine that's probably the route it's going to go down, I think, in a lot of ways too. But yeah, interesting stuff. Well, look, we've managed to somehow go through part 1 already. I don't know where that time's gone, but we will continue this conversation in a moment for us. But for those listening and watching, going to have to come back in a couple of days to catch Gorish in part 2. We're definitely going to carry on this line of thinking, but there are other things that I want to ask you about to do with obviously with Sybil and where things are going and so on. So we're going to be taking a quick break on our end, but for you guys, please click subscribe and all of that bell notification, whatever it is that you got to do. And we'll be back in a couple of days. So that's end of part 1.
Thank you for listening and or watching. Subscribe with notifications turned on to get notified when part 2 comes out. While you wait, please join in the conversation in the comments below.